I had finally saved enough to buy my own place, a house where I could make my own decisions, a place where I answered to no one. At least that's what I thought. Then I met her, Karen. Before we dive into this intense story, we have a small favor to ask. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. It's always incredible to see how far our stories reach. Thank you so much. Now let's dive in. No landlords, no shared walls, no one telling me what I could and couldn't do with my own home. For years, I had lived under someone else's rules. Tiny apartments with thin walls where I could hear my neighbors arguing at 2 a.m., rental agreements filled with ridiculous clauses, and landlords who acted like they owned my entire life just because they held the lease. I had moved from city to city for work, jumping through hoops just to put a nail in the wall or own a dog that wasn't small enough. I had dealt with surprise inspections, rent hikes, and absurd restrictions that made me feel like I was paying for a prison cell instead of a home. But that was over. I had finally saved enough to buy my own place, a house where I could make my own decisions, a place where I answered to no one. At least that's what I thought. Then I met her, Karen. Before we dive into this intense story, we have a small favor to ask. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. It's always incredible to see how far our stories reach. Thank you so much. Now let's dive in. She introduced herself before I even finished unpacking. I was drenched in sweat, hauling boxes out of my truck under the blazing August sun when I saw her marching toward me. Not walking, marching. The kind of stride that says, "I'm in charge here, and you will know it." Blonde bob. Sunglasses perched on her nose. Crisp white polo with an HOA logo embroidered over her heart. Clipboard in one hand, pen in the other, clicking it repeatedly like a metronome counting down to my doom. "Afternoon," she greeted with a practiced smile. "I'm Karen, president of the HOA. Just wanted to welcome you to the neighborhood." I wiped sweat from my brow and nodded. "Appreciate that. Didn't realize there was an HOA here." Her smile didn't waver. "Oh, we take great pride in keeping the community orderly." She handed me a thick packet of papers. "These are the community guidelines. I noticed your moving truck is parked slightly over the sidewalk. That's a violation, but since you're new, we'll let it slide." I blinked. "You'll let it slide?" I had read every document before buying this place. Not once had anyone mentioned an HOA. Karen chuckled like I had just said something adorable. "Oh, we annexed this street into the HOA last year. You're part of it now." Her smile tightened. "And compliance is mandatory." I took a step forward, voice steady. "I don't owe you or your board a damn thing." The fake friendliness dropped in an instant. Karen's eyes turned cold. Her voice lowered to a whisper. "You'll find things go a lot smoother if you just follow the rules." I stared her down. "I'm not paying a cent." Her lips curled into a knowing smirk. "Suit yourself." She turned to leave, but hesitated at the edge of my driveway. "But don't say I didn't warn you." She walked away. That should have been the end of it. But Karen was just getting started. By the next morning, my mailbox was stuffed with violation notices. Violation #1, unapproved mailbox design. Violation #2, overgrown grass. Violation #3, failure to register for HOA compliance. I had lived here for one day. My lawn was fine. My mailbox was identical to everyone else's. I crumpled the notice and tossed it in the trash. Big mistake. By the end of the week, I had 6 more violations, each one more ridiculous than the last. Porch light too bright. Trash bin positioned at an unapproved angle. Unauthorized exterior color. Then came the fines. $150, $250, $500, each one demanding immediate payment. I ignored them. Then things escalated. I came home to find a man, one of Karen's so-called HOA officers, on my property, measuring my fence. I stormed over. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" He didn't even look up. "Routine compliance inspection." I stepped in front of him. "Get off my property." He smirked. "Not according to HOA rules." I clenched my jaw. "I'm not in your HOA." He just smiled. "Karen says otherwise." The next day I came home to find a tow truck hooked up to my truck. I ran up to the driver. "Put it down!" The driver shrugged. "HOA order." I pointed at my truck. "It's a damn pickup. That's not commercial." He just smirked. "Take it up with the board." I was done. I marched straight to Karen's house and knocked hard. This time she didn't even pretend to be friendly. "I warned you," she said simply. "You're done, Karen. I'm taking this to court." Karen chuckled. "Good luck. Our legal team is very well funded. And if I were you, I'd think twice before making enemies in this neighborhood." That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Then, just after midnight, I heard footsteps outside. At first, I thought it was an animal. Then I saw them, shadows, moving near my breaker box. Someone was trying to cut my power. I grabbed my flashlight and stormed outside, but by the time I got there, they were gone. I checked my security cameras, but the footage was too dark. They were testing me, seeing how far they could push me before I broke. But they were about to find out. I don't break easy. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my darkened living room, watching the security feeds. My shotgun lay across my lap, safety off. Every time a shadow shifted or a branch rustled, my fingers tensed. They had tested me once. I knew they'd come back. And at 2:37 a.m., they did. First, one motion sensor tripped, then 3 more. They were here. I switched the monitor to my back porch camera. Shadows moved just beyond the fence line. Then I checked the front camera. 2 more men creeping toward my front door. This wasn't some prank. They weren't just messing with my power this time. They were coming inside. I stood slowly, gripping the shotgun tighter. My heart pounded, but not from fear, from rage. I moved silently toward the hallway, my steps careful against the hardwood floor. Then, the doorknob turned. A soft click. They had picked the lock. The door inched open. A boot crossed the threshold. Rack click. I took a step forward, just enough for them to see the silhouette of the shotgun barrel aimed directly at their chests. They froze. I exhaled slowly, voice cold. Last warning. The man in front hesitated. Then I saw his hand move toward his belt. I didn't wait to see what he was reaching for. Boom! I fired. Not at them, but just over their heads, shattering the porch light above them. They scrambled, tripping over each other as they bolted for the door. By the time I stepped onto the porch, they were already halfway down the street, disappearing into the night. But I wasn't done. I picked up my phone, dialed 911. The moment the dispatcher answered, I laid it out. 5 men, armed, attempted home invasion, fled the scene. I have security footage. Send officers, now! I sat on my porch, shotgun resting across my lap, waiting. This time, I wasn't letting them get away with it. The police arrived within minutes, sirens cutting through the night. I played them the footage. The officers exchanged looks. They weren't surprised. One of them, an older guy with sharp eyes, turned to me. "Sir, do you know if these men were affiliated with your HOA?" That's when I knew. This wasn't some random break-in. This was Karen, and she had just made a very big mistake. The next morning, I expected a call from the police, maybe an update, maybe even some arrests. Instead, I woke up to cops at my front door. For me. 2 officers stood on my porch, hands resting on their belts. "Sir, we need to talk." I folded my arms. I already gave my statement. The taller cop, a grizzled guy with a tired look, sighed. "We're not here about that." His partner, a younger officer, glanced at his notepad. "Your HOA president has filed a complaint against you. Claims you brandished a firearm and threatened members of the community." I almost laughed. "You mean the armed men who broke into my house?" The officers exchanged a look. My grip tightened on the doorframe. "Official business at 2 in the morning? With lockpicks?" The younger cop cleared his throat. "Karen says they were performing a late-night compliance check." I stared at him. He stared back. Neither of them believed a damn word of it. The older cop finally sighed. "You got security footage?" I set my tablet on the porch railing and pressed play. They watched in silence. When the footage ended, the younger cop muttered under his breath, "Damn HOA is out of control." The older cop rubbed his jaw. "Yeah, that's not a compliance check." Then he did something I wasn't expecting. He turned to his partner. "Get a warrant. We're paying Karen a visit." I stepped onto my porch just in time to hear shouting down the street. Squad cars were parked in front of Karen's house. She was outside, red-faced, screaming at the officers. "This is harassment! You should be arresting him! He's a menace to this community!" One of the officers, my guy, the grizzled cop, held up a folder. "Ma'am, we have multiple reports of HOA overreach, trespassing, and fraudulent permit enforcement. We're opening an official investigation." Karen turned pale. She tried to argue, tried to charm them, tried to weasel her way out of it. But the moment they mentioned search warrants and subpoenas, her whole demeanor changed. For the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. She knew she had overplayed her hand, And she wasn't smiling anymore. Karen Hamilton thought she was untouchable. She thought her HOA rules were law, that the fines, the threats, the break-in, none of it would ever come back to haunt her. She was about to find out just how wrong she was, because once the police got involved, I knew one thing. I had an opening. And I wasn't just going to fight back. I was going to burn everything she built to the ground. The next morning, I drove straight to the county records office. I wasn't just looking for proof that Karen and her HOA were corrupt. I wanted to know how deep the scam went. I approached the clerk, an older woman with glasses perched on the end of her nose. "Hi, I need to check any permits tied to my property." She frowned and tapped at her keyboard. Then her eyebrows shot up. "Sir, there are no open permits under your address." I wasn't surprised. "What about HOA filings?" She clicked a few more times, then froze. Her eyes widened. "That's not right." She turned her monitor toward me, and there it was. A list of supposed HOA permits, all flagged invalid. The descriptions were outrageous. Driveway repaving, $5,000 fee. Fence reapproval, $3,200 fee. Lawn inspection, $1,750 fee. Thousands of fake violations. Dozens of forced removals. Karen wasn't just running a power trip, she was running a scam. The HOA wasn't enforcing rules. They were stealing from homeowners, and they had been doing it for years. I went door to door talking to neighbors. The stories were all the same. A woman 3 doors down had been forced to rip out her entire driveway because the HOA claimed it was non-compliant. A retired veteran across the street had paid $110,000 in permit fees to replace a fence. One couple had been paying HOA dues for 5 years on a house that was never in the HOA to begin with. This wasn't mismanagement. It was organized theft. And now, the entire neighborhood wanted blood. By noon, the local news had caught wind of the story. By the time the news caught wind of the scandal, it wasn't just a neighborhood problem anymore. It was a full-blown media circus. Karen thought she was the queen of this neighborhood. She ruled with fines, threats, and intimidation, and for years nobody fought back. Until now, by the time the news caught wind of the scandal, it wasn't just a neighborhood problem anymore, it was a full-blown media circus. The first news van showed up at 7 a.m., parking right in front of Karen's house. By 8 a.m., there were 3 more. By noon, the entire cul-de-sac was flooded with reporters, cameramen, and microphones. Neighbors gathered, whispering, pointing, and at the center of it all, Karen Hamilton's house. For the first time in her life, she had no control. She stepped outside, lips tight, sunglasses on, trying to ignore the cameras. But the moment she set foot on her porch, Miss Hamilton, is it true the HOA extorted homeowners for millions? Do you deny the allegations? How do you respond to reports that you ordered break-ins? Karen froze. For once, she had nothing to say. But the press? They weren't letting her escape. A female reporter, brunette hair, sharp eyes, stepped forward, microphone raised. "Miss Hamilton, we have documentation showing thousands of dollars in fake permit fees. Can you explain that?" Karen's jaw clenched. Then she snapped. "This is harassment," she barked. "You people have no idea what you're talking about. I was protecting this neighborhood." The reporter didn't flinch. "By forcing people out of their own homes?" Karen flushed red. I have lawyers. You'll all be hearing from them." But the reporters weren't done, because just then, a second news van pulled up, and from the passenger seat stepped a familiar face, the district attorney. Karen's face went pale. She turned to go back inside, but it was too late. The DA, a tall man in a crisp suit, walked straight to the cameras, and he wasn't here to play games. He adjusted the microphone, clearing his throat. "As of this morning," he announced, "my office has filed criminal charges against Miss Karen Hamilton for fraud, racketeering, conspiracy to commit extortion, and multiple counts of trespassing and harassment." The crowd gasped. Karen staggered back, gripping the porch railing. "This is insane!" she shouted. "I did nothing wrong!" But the DA wasn't done. He turned, looking right at her. "Miss Hamilton, you are under active investigation for falsifying legal documents, extorting homeowners, and orchestrating an organized permit scam across multiple communities. Your board members have provided substantial evidence against you." Karen gasped. Her own people had betrayed her. The DA took a slow step forward. My office has obtained emails, financial records, and security footage implicating you in multiple criminal activities. Given the evidence, we will be moving forward with an arrest warrant, Karen snapped. You think you can do this to me? She shrieked. She stormed down her porch, marching straight for the DA, and that's when the squad cars rolled in. 2 police cruisers pulled up fast, tires screeching. Doors flew open. Officers rushed forward, weapons at the ready. Karen Hamilton, one of them said, pulling out cuffs. You're under arrest. Her whole body stiffened. You can't do this, she screamed. She turned to the cameras, wild-eyed. This is a setup. This is a witch hunt. But the officers ignored her. One grabbed her wrist. She jerked away. I will sue all of you, she screeched. She turned to run inside. The officer grabbed her shoulder. Don't resist! A struggle. Karen kicked, thrashing, but she was outnumbered. They slammed her against the squad car. Click, click. The cuffs locked tight around her wrists. She twisted, panting, shaking, her entire world falling apart. Then she saw me, standing on my porch, arms crossed, watching it all, her face contorted in pure hatred. You, she spat. This is your fault. I just smirked. No, Karen, this is karma. They shoved her into the back of the squad car. The door slammed shut. By the next morning, the entire HOA office was raided. Officers carried out boxes of forged documents, illegal records, and evidence of years of fraud. Neighbors celebrated in the streets. People who had been silent for years were finally free to speak. The news covered every second of it. By the end of the week, homeowners had filed a massive lawsuit, demanding every single stolen dollar back. By the end of the month, the entire HOA board was dissolved. And the final nail in the coffin? A letter delivered to my mailbox. The Homeowners Association for Redacted Neighborhood has been permanently disbanded. No more corrupt rules, no more fines, no more Karen Hamilton. The HOA was dead. But Karen Hamilton's fight wasn't over, because now she had to face the law. And this time, there was no HOA board to protect her, no fake fines to silence her enemies, no loopholes to crawl through. Just a cold, hard courtroom, and a judge who had zero patience for her bullshit. The courtroom was packed. Homeowners, reporters, lawyers, people Karen had extorted, threatened, and stolen from. Now, they sat behind the prosecution's table. Karen, she sat alone, her expensive lawyer gone, her friends from the HOA turned against her. She looked small, hunched over in a stiff blazer that didn't fit right. She wasn't in control anymore, and she knew it. The prosecution didn't waste time. They called up witness after witness. A retired veteran stepped forward. Karen had fined him $110,000 in fake permit fees, almost forcing him to sell his home. A young couple testified next. They had been paying HOA dues for 5 years, only to discover their house wasn't even in the HOA. The worst? A single mother took the stand. Karen had ordered her car to be towed, fined her thousands in false violations, and threatened to evict her. She had to take out a second mortgage just to keep her home. By the time she finished testifying, half the courtroom was in tears. Karen, she just sat there, jaw clenched, eyes darting to her lawyer, looking for a way out. There wasn't one. Then came the real betrayal. One by one, former HOA board members took the stand, and one by one, they threw Karen under the bus. A former treasurer produced emails showing Karen had been doctoring HOA financial reports for years. A secretary admitted Karen had falsified permits and illegally annexed properties to collect higher fees. And then, the final witness, Karen's former vice president, her right-hand man. He sat down, cleared his throat, and, without hesitation, said, Karen Hamilton ran the HOA like a crime syndicate. The courtroom erupted. Karen slammed her hands on the table. Liars, all of them, she shrieked. The judge banged the gavel. Miss Hamilton, control yourself or you will be removed. Karen fell silent. Her hands trembled. For the first time, she looked afraid. When it was Karen's turn to speak, she did what she always did. She lied. She stood, smoothed her skirt, and faced the judge. Your Honor, she began, her voice syrupy sweet, I have spent years maintaining this community. I am not a criminal. I am a public servant. The prosecutor didn't even let her finish. They pulled out bank statements, showed the offshore accounts where Karen had been hiding stolen HOA funds, displayed surveillance footage of her ordering break-ins and intimidation tactics. Then they played the voicemail, the one she left me. "You should have left it alone." Silence. Karen sank into her chair. She had no more excuses, no more lies, no more escape. The jury took less than an hour to deliberate. When they returned, the foreman stood. The judge asked, "Has the jury reached a verdict?" The foreman nodded. "On the charges of fraud, racketeering, conspiracy to commit extortion, and multiple counts of trespassing and harassment, we find the defendant guilty." The courtroom exploded. Some people cheered, some sobbed. Karen? She just sat there, face frozen in horror. The judge cleared his throat. "Miss Hamilton, you have been found guilty on all counts. Given the severity of your crimes and the financial and emotional devastation caused by your actions, this court has no choice but to impose the maximum sentence." Karen's head snapped up. Her mouth opened, silent, pleading. The judge didn't care. "You are hereby sentenced to 25 years in federal prison," Karen screamed. She turned to her lawyer, who was already packing his briefcase. She turned to the judge, who was signing the sentencing order. Then she turned to me, her face twisted in rage. "You!" she spat. "This is your fault." I just leaned back in my seat, smirked, and said, "Enjoy your HOA in prison, Karen." The bailiff grabbed her arm. She fought, kicking, thrashing. They dragged her away. The last thing I heard as they pulled her through the doors, her screeching like a feral animal. Then, silence. Karen Hamilton was gone. For good. Thank you for watching and following this wild journey. If you enjoyed the story, please don't forget to like, comment, and share your thoughts. Have you ever dealt with a nightmare HOA or a power-hungry neighbor? Let us know in the comments. Your support helps bring more stories like this to life, so stay tuned for more.